offenses in the territory of Afghanistan and Iraq. It's all predicated on what he's done as a Secretary of Defense, sitting in the Pentagon. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is utterly unprecedented assertion of jurisdiction and international law. And what's interesting to me about ICC, while they've not chosen to proceed against American officials and Israeli officials, and I appreciate their restraint, it was not done as a matter of a principal assertion that they lack power to do so, given the fact that neither Israel or the United States have ratified ICC. We've done it as a matter of discretion. And one thing, if you're serious about understanding our political culture, our constitutional history, the way the framers would have approached this issue, you would understand that discretionary activities based upon how responsible the individuals are who are carrying them out is not a long-term basis for feeling comfortable. You're supposed to have institutional barriers to abuses of power. So you can have a prosecutor functioning for 100 years as a discretionary matter, refusing to abuse his power, as long as he does not or she does not assert that there are institutional barriers to that. The framers would not have been reassured. Mr. Jefferson, Mr. Madison would not have been reassured by that. I'm certainly not reassured by that. And the final point I've been dying to point out, with all due respect to my colleagues Diane and President Atkinson, we have a world's longest written constitution. We should take it seriously. It is not a matter of extradition treaty. The structure of American Constitution is utterly incompatible with the proposition that somebody can be prosecuted in a foreign court for actions that are entirely committed on American soil. That is not about extradition. We have a lot of progressive organizations that have argued against the way the United States is treating captured enemy combatants, in part because they're not getting the full guarantees, full guarantees of the Bill of Rights. Not something comparable to it, not something that's due, but full guarantees. And I can assure you, I'm sorry to say, ladies and gentlemen, that for the next 100 years, the United States would not be able to constitutionally participate as a state party in the ICC, because it's not, again, a matter of amending an extradition treaty. You cannot prosecute American citizens for alleged crimes committed here in a foreign court in which the United States is involved, but fundamentally recasting the Constitution of this great country. It ain't going to happen. We can have debates about, well, we should participate in ICC as a policy matter, but not as a full-fledged member.
Thank you, David. Mike, do you want to make a comment on?
First, I suppose I should address the question, which I think was directed to me by the representative of Venezuela, which I gather was about the question of whether there should be reforms in the UN system to assure a more balanced distribution of power, particularly with respect to the Security Council. I'm not sure exactly what reforms she was referring to. I suppose, as it relates to the matter we're discussing today, the question is whether, when the Security Council acts with respect to the court, for example, in referring cases to it which are not otherwise in its jurisdiction, does it act with a proper balance of power as between the permanent members and other members? I see I've not got the question right. Should I go ahead? Or?
Yes, please continue.
I suppose I should just comment on the constitutional issues, although we probably don't have enough time for a detailed debate. First of all, the United States has never been reluctant about prosecuting individuals who committed acts abroad which had a serious effect on the United States for crimes under U.S. criminal jurisdiction. Ask Mr. Noriega about that. The fact is that there are circumstances under which we consider it perfectly appropriate. With respect to the question of extraditing an American citizen to a foreign tribunal that does not follow all the procedures in the U.S. Constitution, U.S. courts have always been willing to approve extraditions of persons to foreign countries, even where there have been differences in the procedures applied in criminal trials, including not giving a trial by jury. In the case of the two ad hoc tribunals for Rwanda and Yugoslavia, the United States supported the possibility of prosecutions even of U.S. citizens, because U.S. citizens are subject to their jurisdiction. And the U.S. Congress passed legislation allowing the extradition of persons in the United States, including U.S. citizens, to these tribunals, even though they didn't offer trial by jury. The question, it seems to me, is whether the ICC has procedures that reasonably offer a fundamental fairness in trial. I'm no expert on the precise procedures, but I believe they are substantially comparable to those of the ad hoc tribunals, which the U.S. government and U.S. courts have found to be appropriate. There, I think, are many reasons why the U.S. government might have legitimate concerns about the trial of American citizens and some other body, particularly if they're American military or civilian personnel. I don't think the Constitution prohibits it.
2 seconds. I don't want to turn this into a discussion of a rich tapestry of our constitutional law, but with all due respect, Professor Nickerson is wrong. In no instance in American history have we ever extradited anybody overseas for crimes committed entirely in this country. If you kill somebody in Mexico or Canada, it is indeed true that United States citizens were extradited, and by the way, we have a very liberal extradition policy, unlike some of our friends who, for example, would not extradite a person because of death penalty, but not for the crimes committed in this country. And there's Supreme Court jurisprudence, getting back to Ex parte Milligan and other cases, that suggest you cannot try people in a court that is not a United States court for offenses committed in this country.
Thank you. Diane, would you like to add some comments?
Yes, well, I wanted to respond to one of the questions that came up earlier, which I understood to be about the decision of the trial chamber of the Rwanda Tribunal in the media case. I believe that was the decision of December 2003. And if I understood your question correctly, you were asking whether this judgment presented some potential threat to journalistic freedom. Did I understand that correctly? Okay, well, assuming that I did, I want to say that this case involved the conviction of people who played a central role in inciting a genocide and were quite properly convicted for that. But I do have some concerns about the breadth of the legal standard that was adopted by the trial chamber. I think that it is quite possible to appropriately convict these people on a narrower standard without presenting a potential threat to freedom of the press. And I hope that the appeals chamber will narrow the range of that opinion. I also want to just briefly respond to David's point about the exercise of discretion. And it won't surprise you that I disagree with David that the prosecutor was simply exercising discretion. He's rule bound. He was bound by the limits in the statute, and the limits in the statute are quite considerable. He dismissed the vast majority of cases because it was patently clear that the court doesn't have jurisdiction over the United States under the circumstances indicated. To the extent that the prosecutor has exercised discretion, he's done it again in a very cautious way, and has seen his proper role as being one to be a safety net under countries where vast numbers of atrocious crimes are occurring and where there's no question that the states concerned are subject to the jurisdiction of the court and cannot conduct prosecutions themselves. I understand David's argument, in effect, to be that we shouldn't trust the court because it has, in fact, complied with the rules that bind it, which are quite considerable, because someday there might be a runaway prosecutor who won't be rule bound. And it seems to me that if the court is constituted properly and, in fact, has shown that it operates within the range of its constraints, that's not a fundamentally sound basis for opposing its continued operation. I say this because it has very serious consequences to start from the premise that the court can never be trusted to operate within the rules that, if followed, I think we would all accept as appropriate. Because it has very profound consequences in situations like Darfur, where, according to a British parliamentary report that was reported yesterday, some 300,000 people have already died. This court is up and running. It is prepared to take on the Darfur case. If it were seized at the Darfur case, it could get busy tomorrow, and hopefully it will, and it could play a deterrent role. The debate about whether the United States should not oppose a Darfur court referral has come down to this. Opponents of the court have been saying